From fresh harvest to full maturity, Pu'erh tea takes many steps. Let's take a closer look. Hey everyone, Sigi here, and I love all things Pu-erh. Now, I've been delving into other types of tea again lately, but I have promised more Pu-erh videos, and here they are. Today, I'm going to start a very brief video series, just two-parter, that looks at the kind of different fragrances and tastes we can expect from Pu-erh tea at different stages of maturity. This first video is going to be dedicated to younger Pu-erh tea. So I'm going to be drinking the Ergazi 2021. It's, I think, just dropped freshly on the nannuoshan shop. This is going to be my example for a younger Pu-erh tea. And then I'm going to drink the 2014 Yiwu, also from nannuoshan. This is actually one of my favorites from the entire nannuoshan shop. And even before we kind of get into this video, this is one I personally recommend a lot. And then for the second video, we are going to look at more mature tea. I did want to make a kind of small distinction there because the kind of jump in characteristics from a very fresh tea to one that is fully mature is just quite large. So we do need to distinguish it a little bit, but hopefully we can see how these things develop. Also, a video that's going to be a very helpful reference for following along here is the video I made in the Pu'erh tea lexicon about Shangqi and about aged aroma. Both of those I highly recommend watching before continuing with this series, just to sort of familiarize yourself with what we might be able to find in these teas. All right, I'd say let's get right into it. My water is already boiling. I've got 5 grams of the Ergazi here, so we are just going to start with the youngest tea right away. Gonna give it a very quick rinse, nothing long. This is also a common kind of error I encounter from people, that they tend to rinse for far too long. Rinsing is really just to remove things like dust, impurities, etc. So you don't need to rinse for very long, because these things are just removed kind of physically. They don't need to be extracted from the leaves or anything. And of course, you want to keep as much stuff in the leaves as possible. So really just pouring in water, maybe moving it around just a little bit, and then pouring out is enough for a proper rinse. Okay. I am using 5 grams for 100 milliliters in this video. If you want to follow along, brew along with me if you have these teas at home. Also keeping the steep times fairly short, because this is Gaiwan Brewing and not Yixing Brewing, and we are dealing with a fairly young and fresh tea. So first thing we can observe, the color of the tea. This is fresh. And this is immediately apparent because there's no sort of hint of orange, amber, those kind of colors. Instead, if we look closely, this is yellow with even a slightly green tinge. So this kind of color you can expect from a tea that is, let's say, like 2 years or younger. Okay. I'm just going to pour this in. Then I'm going to smell the wet leaf, and we're going to talk about, let's talk about what we can expect first. So fresh and young tea. In this kind of tea, we can usually expect kind of these sort of higher pitch fragrances that are often sweet to some extent. The usual distinction there is drawn between fruity fragrances and floral fragrances. The difference in these two usually depends on various steps in processing. For example, how much the leaves were oxidized, how much, like what kind of charging, etc., they received. All of this can change. Of course, terroir also plays a part of it, but it's not quite as immediately apparent when it just comes to distinguishing the age of a tea. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what you can notice immediately when smelling the leaves of this tea is that fruity smell I talked about. Fresh fruit, just like a full bouquet of it, essentially. Nice. Yeah. This is a nice fresh tea. Not much else to say. We do get these fresh and high fragrances. We also get a bit of that kind of greenness that's expected from a young tea. I also expect to find that again as I start drinking it. Yeah. So, kind of what's dominating for this tea are these fresh fragrances, this kind of aromatic intensity. But it does have a little of that kind of greenness to go along with it. So, essentially, exactly what we expected. This is a very typical young, fresh, Pu-erh tea. It is very nice to drink. I like the kind of amount of fruitiness it has. Seems to have more of that than some other young Sheng Pu'er that I've tried. Mm. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's really just quite bright overall. I think that's the best way to describe it. Fresh, young Sheng Pu'er is bright. It it shines. It's got these very sort of pleasant and excitable aromas. Yeah. I am going to do a second steep of this just to see how it develops. Because, in my experience, uh, younger Pu-erh tea also tends to be a bit more dynamic throughout the course of a session. It tends to change a bit more than tea that is fully matured. Okay, so here's steep 2. Just gonna smell the leaves again real quick. Mm-hmm. Ah, now that kind of green character is coming out a bit more. So I imagine we're also gonna see it more in the liquid. And kind of the reason for this, to some extent, I think, is that these high-pitched aromatic compounds, these fruity fragrances that like really hit your nose right away, those tend to be more volatile than whatever is underneath. So, over the course of drinking a tea like this, what you can expect to happen is for these fresh and bright fragrances to be present more in the early steeps rather than the later steeps. All right, let's see what this steep number 2 is like. Mm. Mm-hmm. It's still very nice and fruity, still quite aromatic. So those compounds haven't like quite all dissolved yet. Of course, I think they're gonna stay with the tea for a few more steeps, but this one I'd say is less immediately bright than the first steep. It's a bit more of a balance between the greenness and the brightness. Okay. Now, as I put this off to the side and I clean my pitcher real quick, because we do want this to be a proper comparison, so we need to make sure to clean our TEAWARE in between teas. But as I finish drinking this one, I can already start preparing the next one. This is the Yiwu, I think 2014, from the nannuoshan shop. As I've mentioned, in my opinion, this is a very good tea. And if you haven't had a chance to try it yet, please do. Okay, I am gonna give this a very quick rinse. Same thing as before. Just cover the leaves with a bit of water, swirl it around a little bit, and then pour out right away. We do not want to waste anything. Okay, I'm gonna leave this closed for a second and then give it a smell so I can finish drinking this tea first. But yeah, overall, what can we say about fresh and very young tea? High-pitched fragrances, greenness, usually either fruity or floral, depending on what the processing of the tea was like. Definitely a fun experience. And I think it would also be interesting to sort of go up by one level even further, because this one is a 2021 harvest. And I imagine there will also be a bit of a difference between this and something that is like completely freshly harvested, basically on the same day or something. Would be fun to experiment with if I can ever make it to China. Okay, so tea number 2, Yiwu 2014. Compared to this one is already a fair bit older. This one has seen some rather dry storage conditions, so it hasn't aged that much, but let's take a quick yeah, we can already notice in the leaves as well, these are a fair bit darker than the ones from the Ergazi. Another thing that becomes more immediately apparent to me is this one is nowhere near as bright as the other tea on its first impression. This has already mellowed out quite a bit, and I expect that to also carry over to the color of the tea. I don't expect this one to be sort of yellow with a tinge of green. I expect this one to be more like amber, maybe already getting closer to orange. Another thing I expect that I also mentioned in the Sheng Pu'erh tea lexicon video is that Pu'erh tea should develop a honey fragrance between the age of like 5 and 10 years, depending on storage conditions and processing as well, of course. It's always kind of a holistic thing, but what you can expect from a Pu'erh tea at this age is honey fragrance first and foremost. So, let's see how it holds up. Okay. First of all, color. As you can see in this one, it is still fairly bright, but the hue is different. We don't have that kind of green tinge anymore that we saw in the Ergazi. This one, on the other hand, I think is just perfectly amber. It was yellow and has kind of... It's starting to go in that direction of orange, which is nice to see. Now let's give those wet leaves a good smell. Yeah. In the smell, you can already immediately notice that this is like a stage above the other tea in terms of age. So I'm curious to see how that's going to translate to the tea's taste, and if we're going to find the honey fragrance it's supposed to have. Let me smell the empty pitcher. Okay, here, in this one, we're already getting a bit closer to that kind of honey fragrance that I'm looking for. But one thing that's also important to say, this is mainly supposed to come kind of in the aftertaste. You're not gonna like smell the tea when it's dry, or you're not gonna drink the tea and immediately notice, oh, here's some honey fragrance. You need to swallow the tea, and then the honey fragrance is what's gonna come out afterwards. Mm-hmm. And there it is, yeah. As I was taking the second steep, I already kind of felt it creeping up from behind. But yeah, it's definitely there now. The aftertaste of this tea is like this sweet and pleasant honey. Not an overly bright honey, but like a nice and round sweetness. Mmm. Oh, so nice, so nice. Another thing you can notice is that the green-ish taste, like that kind of fresh taste that was present in the previous tea, is not present in this one anymore. So this really is just sweet. I would say this one is a bit thicker than the other one, though that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with age. That can also be related to a lot of other factors. Oh, and now on the wow, this is on the empty cup here. If you smell this right now after drinking, it is like opening a jar of honey and smelling it. This this particular tea has a remarkable honey fragrance, and at least if I'm allowed to speculate a bit, my assumption would be with this tea, given what I'm seeing here and how it has indeed developed that desired honey fragrance, and its color is appropriate, its texture is good. I think this might be a good candidate for aging. I think if you give this tea another 10 years or so, it's going to be quite wonderful. I mean, obviously, it's wonderful as well now, but I think this one is on a very good trajectory. It's kind of hitting all of the marks it's supposed to for a tea at this kind of age. Yeah. So, the first stage, the first signs of a tea that's really maturing is, after these 5 to 10 years, a change in color, no more greenness in the tea soup, and a honey fragrance that lingers in your mouth after you swallow the tea. So already, even though these teas are basically just one stage apart, we are noticing some pretty significant differences. Of course, the difference in time between these teas is 7 years. This Yiwu tea is almost a decade old now, which might seem like a long time, but in Pu-erh terms, it really is not a lot of time. We can go much, much deeper, and that is exactly what we're going to do in the next video. If you enjoyed this one, please leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment. Let's get into a discussion of how you understand the different steps of maturing Pu-erh, what you use as sort of characteristics for each stage to distinguish them when you try a new tea, that kind of thing. let's try to pool our knowledge together and see what we can come up with. Yeah. Just once again, as a reminder here, this color is exactly what you're looking for from a tea that's around this kind of 5 to 10 year mark. Of course, it's always going to depend on storage conditions, but even in drier storage conditions, there should still be some development. Unless the tea is dried, like stored so dry that it just kind of dies off, there should always be some kind of change in your Pu-erh tea. If it is like Pu-erh tea proper, if it was processed properly, etc. And this kind of change is also something we as Pu-erh drinkers are seeking out. That's a big part of what makes Pu-erh tea so special and interesting. But with that, I'm going to sign off for now. I'm going to finish drinking this Yiwu tea because, as I said, I really like it a lot and I do recommend it. And I will see you all for the next video where we delve into more mature Pu-erh tea. Goodbye.